Have you heard the term politically correct? I dare say we've all been affected by it in some way. However, if you're not familiar with the term, it's often used to describe language or behavior that tries to minimize offenses to racial, religious, or other identity groups. In other words, it tries to use other words to describe someone in a way that won't offend them. Some good results of political correctness include new ways of describing people with disabilities, ways to show greater respect and preserve dignity. Anytime it helps eliminate unflattering references to groups, that's good. However, many effects of political correctness are not good. For example, in order not to offend atheists and other non-Christian groups, the politically correct way of saying Merry Christmas is to say Happy Holidays. Other examples of politically correct terms include undocumented workers instead of illegal aliens, insurgents instead of terrorists, pro-choice instead of abortion, and the list goes on. This also affects behavior. For example, a breakfast with Santa recently turned into a winter wonderland breakfast because one person considered Santa to be a religious figure. Cities around the country stopped displaying nativity scenes, not because they're illegal, but because they were afraid of lawsuits and of offending some minority group. In some cities, ordinances limiting noise levels have been changed to allow Islamic mosques to broadcast their calls to prayer 5 times a day over loudspeakers. And finally, Disneyland and Disney World, places famous for catering to our children, now cater to gays and lesbians in a day specially set aside for them. And while we may not think on the surface that political correctness is anything but a harmless waste of energy, we need to take a closer look, because political correctness is actually very destructive to our culture and our American values. It actually threatens our national security, undermines our American patriotism, and elevates one world religion over another. In the next few minutes, I want to expose political correctness to the light so we can see some of the direct results of this very destructive trend. But first, a little background. According to Answers.com, the term politically correct actually came from Marxist-Leninist ideals and was originally used by old guard communists to mean towing the party lines. It was reintroduced in the 1970s and early 80s by conservative writers who used it primarily to describe the tendency toward adherence and progressive behavior in speech. So, how does political correctness threaten our national security? On November 5th, 2009, Army Major Nidal Malik Hassan, a radical Muslim terrorist, opened fire on his United States military comrades, killing 14 people and wounding 30 in Fort Hood, Texas. You notice I referred to Hassan as a radical Muslim terrorist? You most likely won't hear that from the media, because it wouldn't be politically correct. But if we're honest with ourselves and each other, we'll call it for what it is, regardless of race, religion, or anything else. Hassan was outspoken in his disdain for the United States, attended the same mosque in Northern Virginia that 2 9/11 hijackers attended. He was overheard praising a Muslim who shot 2 soldiers at a military recruiting center in Little Rock, Arkansas. And he shouted Allah Akbar, the battle cry of jihadists, as he poured bullets into our soldiers on November 5th. By any logical rationale, Hassan is a radical Muslim terrorist, no matter how politically incorrect that may sound. According to Gary Bauer, former United States presidential candidate and president of Focus on the Family, the U.S. military was aware of Hassan's treasonous acts long before the attack. Bauer writes, Hassan sent numerous emails to an Islamo-fascist cleric known for encouraging Muslims to rise up and kill the infidels. He gave a lecture to fellow military psychologists advocating that non-Muslims be beheaded. Yet Hassan's anti-American rants were basically ignored. Why? Bauer goes on to write, some military people claim they didn't file complaints because they were afraid it would hurt their careers in the increasingly politically correct Army bureaucracy. Lieutenant Colonel Val Fennell, one of Hassan's classmates in Bethesda, Maryland, told Fox News, they should have confronted him, our professors, officers, but they were too concerned about being politically correct. Another Army investigator told Fox News that political correctness insulated Hassan. People are afraid to come forward and challenge somebody's ideology, he said, because they're afraid of getting an equal opportunity complaint that can end careers. Although this is just one example, there are many others. For example, Decision Q, a Washington, D.C. quantitative analysis firm, recently proved that they can predict terrorist attacks on airplanes within about 99% accuracy, but it requires the use of the dreaded and politically incorrect process of profiling. Israel has demonstrated the effectiveness of this process for years, but they're not known for being very politically correct. I cringe to think that our government might be catering to terrorists for the greater fear of political correctness. Political correctness is also affecting patriotism in our country. It's politically incorrect to refer to the United States as the greatest nation in the world because it might offend someone. And many schools no longer recite the Pledge of Allegiance for the same reason. I believe one of the most devastating impacts of political correctness is its elevation of Islam over Christianity. Now, I realize this is shocking, but Mr. Bauer makes another very important point. What would most people call a photograph of a small plastic crucifix submerged in a glass of urine? Appalling? Blasphemous? The politically correct response is to call it modern art. It won a $15,000 grant from the National Endowment of Arts, which provides taxpayer money to fund art, even if that art is blatantly anti-Christian. Now, what would you call a Quran submerged in a toilet? Disgusting? Disrespectful? The politically correct response is to call it a hate crime and a felony, punishable by up to 2 years in prison. A student was recently arrested at Pace University on felony charges for throwing a Quran into a university toilet. Do you think he'd be arrested for throwing a Bible into a toilet? This double standard is becoming pervasive. In our public schools, there's an effort to make test books more Islamic. In California, lessons about the life of Muhammad are now being included in reading and writing curricula. Do you think they'd allow lessons on Jesus' life to be inserted into those same textbooks? I doubt it. It's taken them over 40 years to purge any resemblance of Christianity out of our public school system. Perhaps political correctness started innocently, as a way of not offending minority groups. But clearly today, it has evolved to something much more destructive. What made it morph to this? Could it be that it is linked to the primary objectives of terrorism in the first place? Fear and intimidation for the purpose of expanding the Muslim faith? Wow, does that sound politically incorrect or what? But think about it. In almost every example we've talked about today, fear and intimidation were the motivations. The United States of America has been defined as a culture of brave, strong, determined, innovative, principled individuals. But political correctness is destroying our culture and our American values from the inside out as we give way to the very fear and intimidation our soldiers are fighting on the other side of the world to defeat. We must stand up against political correctness, rooted in fear and intimidation, especially if it compromises our national security, erodes our American values, or elevates one world religion over another. This stand will require courage, it will require boldness, and it may even require sacrifice. I am willing to take this stand. I will call Christmas Christmas, not some watered-down phrase designed by someone who has an agenda against Christianity. I will call terrorists terrorist when they use fear, intimidation, and violence to further their cause. I will correct anyone who calls the killing of an unborn child a woman's right to choose instead of an abortion. And I will confront any other delusion of the truth disguised as political correctness. Will you join me in taking this stand? Together we can stop this subtle yet very destructive trend, and we can do it without an act of Congress or an executive order. It'll take our courage, our boldness, and our sacrifice, but it'll be worth it to defend our Christian values and preserve our American culture.